I had built an Instagram community called Humans of BYU, where I interviewed 100 strangers. And I think honest is being open about who I am and what I'm experiencing. Integrity is being in alignment with my beliefs. And authenticity is being in alignment with my true self as a divine being. Honesty is the bedrock of healthy and transformative relationships. If you don't feel like you can be honest, then your relationships aren't going to be as deep. If you don't feel like you can be real, your relationships aren't going to be as deep. You're not going to connect with people as much. If you're not going to connect with people as much, you're not going to be as changed, because it's through our deep relationships with people, God, and ourselves that we're changed and we're fulfilled. People aren't wanting you to be perfect. Like, nobody wants that. That's not relatable. That's not real. As on the Sermon of the Mount, be perfect, historians have all come to the conclusion of this means to be complete, essentially. It's not this term of perfect that we've all coined perfect to be, of no flaws, no mistakes. God wants us to be complete, and the way that we're complete is having a relationship with God. I mean, the older that I get, the more I'm ooh, people are hurting me all the time, and I'm also hurting them all the time. And so what do I do about that?
So who am I and what is Turn Outward? My name is Spencer Smalley, and I'm currently completing my master's in social work in order to become a licensed therapist. I've worked in mental health for 3.5 years now, and I see some concerning trends in mental health that I want to speak out against. Number one, I want to normalize being vulnerable in an online world of comparison where we post about our highs and don't talk about our lows. Number two, I want to change the narrative that we need to heal ourselves before we can help other people. Finding connection and purpose in helping others is crucial to our own healing. Number three, I want to share my faith. David Bednar says that the character of Jesus Christ is to turn out when the natural man would turn inward. Me and my guests share stories of how trusting in a higher power has allowed us to love and serve others in deeper and more meaningful ways. I want to build bridges of belief regardless of someone's underlying religious or spiritual background. I hope you'll join me in my journey of trying to help the world turn outward. All right, today we have Hannah Larson. Hannah, how you doing?
I'm excited to be here with you.
Well, I'm excited too. This is kind of uncharted territory for the Turn Outward podcast. So up until this point, pretty much all my guests have been friends of mine, people that I know. And Hannah is actually the first guest that I've had on the podcast that I literally met her today. I met her 30 minutes ago. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting. As you guys get to know Hannah, I'll be getting to know her as well. And so really excited. We've chatted a little bit before the podcast and had some great discussions, and hoping to continue to do so during the recording. So without further ado, Hannah, introduce yourself to us a little, help us get to know you a little bit better.
Wow. Thank you so much, Spencer. I feel so honored to be here. I'm really excited. Also, I love meeting strangers. That's one of my favorite things ever. So I don't know if I have done it in a podcast like this before. So thank you. My name is Hannah Larson. I am first and foremost a disciple of Jesus Christ, big fan of Jesus. Secondly, a creator. I am currently on a mission to help people more authentically connect with God and their divine identity. I am from Arizona, and I just moved up here a couple months ago because God has been calling me to build another online community to help people become more real in their relationship with God and just more real in general. And so I've been up in Utah for a couple of months networking with people. In order to support myself and building a faith coaching business, I previously taught seminary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and loved that. I really would love to work one-on-one with people on their faith and spiritual journeys. And yeah, I also have been hosting in-person events where people can come and just be open about their faith and spiritual journeys, regardless of where they're at on their spiritual journey, regardless of what church they attend. And the reason why I'm doing that is just because I see a need for more safe spaces and more fun spaces to explore God and spirituality and genuinely connect with other people over that. So that's what I have been doing most recently. Like I said, I grew up in Arizona. I went to BYU. I studied public relations. I worked in PR for a little bit, but I graduated from BYU in 2020. And at the time, I had built an Instagram community called Humans of BYU, where I interviewed 100 strangers on the most intimate parts of their life story, wrote their stories, took their photos, and created a community from that. And ultimately, the goal was to transition that to a platform where I could interview members of the church around the world and create that same kind of empathy. Around this time, I had experienced a very severe and traumatic breakup and was diagnosed with depression and ultimately could not figure out how to make that transition, how to start a business from it, essentially, even though it was a very active community. And so I graduated from BYU thinking that that was the path, that I was going to start a business through doing that. And then being diagnosed with depression for the first time was really hard for me. I knew I needed to figure out my mental health. I knew I needed to take care of myself. And so I stepped away from that goal and started going to therapy, started really studying psychology. And in the meantime, for job wise, I kind of was like, well, what are my other dreams? And so I just checked off everything on my dream list. I taught seminary for a year. I moved to Italy to teach English. I was a tour guide for a year in Arizona. And now I'm here trying to build this community and build a business and essentially just try to do what God wants me to do, which is just, a process trying to figure that out. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, thank you. What a great introduction. So Hannah originally reached out to me on Instagram, and so I had an opportunity to looked a little bit through her profile and kind of see what she was about. And kind of on your bio, you have the authenticity queen.
Yes.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about that. Like, what does authenticity mean to you, and how has it kind of shaped your life?
I love that question. Thank you for asking that. That is a recently coined phrase that I have taken upon myself as I've been trying to figure out, what I'm doing. I essentially, so when I was 13 years old, I heard this song called Honest. And it was just like a church song. I don't even remember who it was from, but I remember listening to the song and just having the spirit really resonate with me and just be like, this is who you are. Like, this is a huge part of who you are. And just really resonating with the principle of honesty and just kind of being like, if I am honest, that is going to connect me with God, because if I'm open and real about who I am with God, He can help me in the ways that I need to. And also, if I'm open and honest about who I am with other people, that can help me have the deepest relationships that I need to. And so the principle of honesty, my Instagram handle is Honest Han. The principle of honesty has always been a very, core value of my life. And ultimately, in terms of authenticity to me, how I've defined it is not just honesty, but being in alignment with who I am as a divine daughter of God. And that has come through my search of being honest and being honest in my relationships and being honest with my relationship with God. But in my own, I think, self-discovery of what is authenticity, what does it mean to me to be authentic? What does it mean to me to be honest? What does it mean to me to have integrity? I mean, I think honest is being open about who I am and what I'm experiencing. Integrity is being in alignment with my beliefs. And authenticity is being in alignment with my true self as a divine being. And I think that we accomplish that through our relationship with God and through our relationship with ourselves and through our relationship with other people. And at the heart of who I am and at the heart of my mission to help people become more real and to help people be more honest, especially in terms of their spirituality, is really helping people align with their true selves, with their divine selves, because I believe that that is true authenticity. So,
Well, thank you for breaking it down. I've never heard it broken down quite like that. Honesty, integrity, authenticity. Very cool.
that was just all the spirit, just so you know.
Yeah,
I
that's
didn't
cool.
come up with that myself.
Well, I had so many thoughts like as you were talking. I think honesty can be a tricky thing for a lot of people. And it's interesting that we're talking about this now because literally during this week I was listening to a podcast and they're talking about how if you're doing something that you're trying to hide or keep a secret, that's probably an indication that what you're doing is wrong, and that you should probably not be doing that thing. However, there is a difference between keeping something secret and keeping something sacred. And so I think a lot of people struggle with how open, how honest to be, how much of their lives to share because they're like, what do I keep to myself and what do I put out in the world in order to let other people know that what they're experiencing isn't alone. And I have a bunch of, thoughts on that. I've talked about that with my friend Andre Hurtado on episode 7 about like how much do I divulge on social media and that kind of thing. But I've going back to what I was first saying about, if you're keeping something secret, that's probably an indication of what you shouldn't be doing. I have come across people that have had to literally build a network of lies in their life because they're doing something that they might be going out with multiple people at the same time and kind of keeping it non-committal, and that's kind of their excuse or justification for it. And so they kind of build themselves in this kind of trap of their own lies, and they have to keep like making the lies more and more elaborate, right? And so honesty is something to where it's really freeing in a way. It allows us to to put out who we really are with confidence because we know that we are living within our values. And I think what's difficult is all of us make mistakes from time to time to where we don't live within our values. And I definitely throw myself into that category because, like I said, that's everyone from time to time, where I have done things where I've acted outside of my values. And it's really hard for me to know, like, do I need to tell people about this? Like, do other people need to know about this? Because if I hide this or I keep this secret, am I pretending to be someone I'm not? Are people thinking I'm this awesome person when really I'm someone that's made a lot of like pretty serious mistakes, And so, and I was literally talking with a friend. I was like, I think it's really hard for me to like receive compliments in a way because I'm like, I people see the best version of myself in a way, but I've like seen the version of myself that's like made really serious mistakes in my past. And I know that like, part of me when I'm stressed or when I'm going through something wants to return to those same mistakes. And so I know that that's like in me. I know that that's part of me. And so it's hard for me to receive compliments because I'm like, oh, thank you so much. That's so kind of you. But on the inside, I'm like, you don't know.
Interesting.
Like, you don't know how I really am.
Yeah.
You don't. And I know my weaknesses, my flaws better than you. I know the depths that I've gone to in certain situations. And so, I don't know, kind of a lot of different thoughts, but I'm curious what your take on all that is.
Yeah. I'm curious, what do you feel, what is the, given you're in a space where you feel safe, what is the fear behind being honest about some of those mistakes? Like, what's the fear behind that?
I think it's based mostly on past experiences.
Okay.
Where I have opened up to certain people.
And then you haven't been received well.
Yeah,
Okay.
not being received well or having that person view me differently. And so that kind of changed my perspective of like, I need to be a little more selective. Like, I can't cast my pearls before swine.
Right, for sure.
Like, there are going to be people that are just unconditionally supportive no matter what I do, my family included in that.
Right.
My mom, of course, my mom's always going to love me. And, I'm blessed in that way. Not
Yeah.
everyone has that,
Right.
but yeah, I've had experiences where, I opened up to people about depression and suddenly they viewed me differently. They
Right, for
suddenly
sure.
view me as like, a
Yes.
little bit weaker, a
Yeah.
little bit less
Right.
resilient,
Yeah.
or I've opened up to people about mistakes I've made in the
Right.
past. And it's like, on the outside, they don't necessarily say, oh, like, you terrible person, but you
Right.
can kind of tell the way they look
Yeah.
at you is like, wow, I thought Spencer was like this great guy and I can't believe he'd do something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I think it's mostly built on past experiences. It might also be me like projecting a little bit, projecting like
Yeah.
how I perceive that they perceive,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
But I've seen relationships kind of fizzle out after
Yeah.
that vulnerability, and so there's like a fear of like
Yeah.
if I disclose
Right.
everything,
Yeah.
then it's
Do you feel, I mean, you mentioned your family and your mom. Do you feel like you, even in those relationships, that you can disclose everything? Like, do you feel like you can be 100% honest?
that is a good question. So my mom has a lot of health issues.
Okay.
And so there are definitely things I don't tell my mom because if I let her know that I'm struggling in this way or that I'm making a certain type of mistake, I have a fear that like it's going to hurt her.
Right.
Right? And her physical health issues are very much tied to her mental health. And so worrying that like what I disclose to
Yeah.
her is going to impact her health in a way
Right.
and make her really worried and anxious and just and also I worry about that with my parents. My parents are just worriers.
Yeah, of
in a
course,
way,
they're parents.
which like
Yeah.
a lot of good parents are.
Yeah, for sure.
And this is an interesting discussion that we could go off on a different branch, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
I'll
that's
just
okay.
touch on it briefly, but like I feel like worrying as a parent in a way is, I don't know. I don't want to say that it's selfish, but I do want to, I don't know. Especially in a faith-based perspective, I think like if you understand like the promises that God has made us, especially in a covenant relationship, like being able to have more trust and faith, it's like, hey, I've got this. Like I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And being able to trust God in that way. And so sometimes I try and convince my parents like, hey, like if you really like trust God, like you guys shouldn't be worrying so much, and that's a really hard discussion for them to
Yeah,
receive
for
because they're
sure.
like, you just don't understand because you're not a parent. But
Yes.
anyways, going back to what we were saying is like, yeah, there's a lot that I do not disclose because I'm worried of how it's going to affect my parents. For
Right.
Sure.
So do you feel you have any space in your life currently where you can disclose 100%?
Wow, this is like really turning kind of spicy like but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a friend.
Good. That's awesome.
I have a friend that I can
I
pretty
don't
much
mean to
tell anything
That's
to.
amazing. I obviously this is kind of my thing, is to ask questions like that, honestly, but also I obviously am not trying to make you uncomfortable or like turn things spicy, or I'm just, the reason why I'm asking is because that's a core part of my mission, is creating spaces where people feel like they can be 100% themselves and 100% open, regardless of whether or not they have that. And obviously, therapy hopefully is a place where people can do that. But I'm sorry. In terms of my work and my experiences, what happened was, growing up, had this, deep love for God, deep love for people. So I'm from a really small town in northern Arizona. It's a tourist town. I grew up 5 minutes away from the largest Native American reservation in the country. 80% of my high school is Native American. Also, because it was a tourist town, I grew up meeting people from all over the world. So from a very young age, my love for people and learning their stories runs very deep. And also my love for building connections and relationships runs very deep as well. When I was 16, God told me that the whole reason why I was here on this earth was to do everything I could to help his children feel his love. A couple weeks after that, I discovered Humans of New York on Instagram, which currently is still a thing. A man goes around New York City and the world. He interviews them, captures their story in order to increase empathy and understanding. I knew after seeing that Instagram account that was doing more to help people love each other than anything else on social media at the time. This was 12 years ago. Instagram was just being a thing, so there's now a lot of stuff like that. But I knew that it was through these people's vulnerability and being honest about who they were and their experiences that was helping cultivate love across the entire world. And I knew that was what I was meant to do with my life, was to help people open up, essentially, and share who they were in order to increase love in their lives, in my lives, and in the world around them. Fast forward to BYU, I started Humans of BYU, which was fashioned after Humans of New York. And I interviewed 100 strangers about the most intimate parts of their life story. And what would happen was, these were all strangers from all different backgrounds. What would happen was I'd have these 1.5 to 2 hour long interviews with these people who I'd never met before. And as I talked to them, I would say probably 95% of the interviews that I had with people, every single one of those people would be like, I've never told anyone this before telling me the most traumatic thing or the most heavy thing that they'd ever experienced. I was so grateful and so honored and so privileged that people would tell me that, especially because they didn't know me. However, it started to be a really big cause of concern for me, because I was like, these people, I've interviewed 100 different people from all over the world at this campus, and 95 out of 100 of them are essentially telling me they don't have a safe space to share the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to them. They don't have a safe space to share something that has totally changed their life and shaped who they are as a person. That is really concerning to me, just in general in society, also in terms of in the church as well. Because if we don't have these spaces in our lives where we can be honest about how we're feeling or our experiences, then we're not going to be able to connect as deeply with people and as deeply with God. Obviously, I wholeheartedly believe that Jesus Christ is the ultimate safe space. I believe God is the ultimate safe space. So ultimately, like, my number one concern is helping people feel safe in their relationships with God so that they feel they can be honest with God, because it's through our relationship with God that we become who we're meant to be, that we're fulfilled. However, what's happening is our relationships with each other, we don't feel safe in them. A lot of people don't have people that they count as close friends. A lot of people who, even if they do have close friends, still feel like they can't share. And I just ultimately believe that honesty is the bedrock of healthy and transformative relationships. If you don't feel like you can be honest, then your relationships aren't going to be as deep. If you don't feel like you can be real, your relationships aren't going to be as deep. You're not going to connect with people as much. If you're not going to connect with people as much, you're not going to be as changed, because it's through our deep relationships with people, God, and ourselves that we're changed and we're fulfilled. And I personally believe what's happening in society right now with the loneliness epidemic, with the mental health crisis. Obviously, mental health is such a spectrum. I'm not going to, narrow it down to one thing. But in my personal experience with mental health struggles, in my observations of other people's, a lot of what is at the core of a lot of mental health struggles is fear, is shame, is despair. All of these things that are really paralyzing people from really being open and really connecting. And it's like kind of hard. And that's why I wanted to come onto this podcast, because this idea of turning outward, this idea of turning outward to other people, turning outward to God, and being real is ultimately what I believe is going to save us, because it's only through being honest that we really connect. And in order to be saved, we have to really connect with God and other people and ourselves. That was a lot. I'm so sorry.
That was awesome. As you were talking about, I think in terms of answering the question, how much do I divulge of my life? I think if there's something from the past that impacts how you view yourself and you haven't made peace with it, you need at least one person,
For sure.
one person that you can be totally honest with. I remember opening up to my therapist back in 2021, and I told him something I'd done when I was 15. Like that I hadn't told religious leaders, I hadn't told my
Right.
parents, I hadn't told friends, I hadn't told anyone. And I was convinced that telling my therapist this thing was going to like ruin our therapeutic relationship because he was going to think I was this bad person. And that's looking back on that now, it's so funny because now that I am a therapist, like that's literally our job, is to like have unconditional positive regard for people and to like not be judgmental. And therapists hear stuff like that all the time. And the first thing he said to me, he's like, first and foremost, you're 15. Second of all, like that's not that as uncommon as you think.
Right.
And like third of all, like it's like it's okay, like that doesn't define who you are. And that was like such a relief to me. And so I think when we've truly made peace with the past ourselves, then suddenly, oh, how much do I disclose to social media? How much do I disclose in my public life? It no longer becomes such an issue because we no longer care as much what other people think because we ourselves have made peace with it, right? And I think that's something I'm still working on because at least something I perceive in society is like we are more tolerant and more accepting and loving towards people that are struggling or are like obviously struggling or haven't made it in a sense. As soon as someone becomes successful or receives like a certain position or has a certain level of audience or whatever, we hold them to a higher standard. We see this with celebrities and cancel culture. It's like as soon as something is divulged from a celebrity's past, like the internet goes to war on this person and like attacks them, like, how could you say this? How could you do this? Right? It's like if you have made it to a certain point and reached a certain pedestal, you are held to a higher standard and you are expected to be more perfect, right? Whereas like with the average person, you know, who's struggling to pay their bills just like the rest of us, you know, like we're way much more tolerant, we're way much more compassionate. And so I've had, you know, as I've started this podcast, I'm like, wow, like people listen to this, people care about this. Suddenly I have to be like this perfect person who's like figured everything out. And so I try and be vulnerable through this podcast and say like, look, I'm still struggle with things. I still have character defects. I still make mistakes. I'm not perfect in my relationships. I've hurt people and recently even like I've made mistakes and I'm trying to learn and grow and like change.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm like accepting of that in a way and say like, oh, that's fine. Like I'm trying to learn from it and grow, but like, you know, it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, I think people listen because of the vulnerability and because of the honesty. Like people aren't wanting you to be perfect. Like that's not, nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. That's not relatable. That's not real. Nobody, even if you are a celebrity, even no matter what your status is, everyone is struggling. Everyone is making mistakes. Everyone is messing up. And I think I mean, obviously we see that in society in terms of like cancel culture, this idea that you like make it is like very apparent. You like get to a point where you stop making mistakes. And that's in society. It's also in the church as well. Like, and I mean, I can't speak for all Christian, you know, all church in general, but at least in the Church of Jesus Christ, there is definitely like like people become bishops or people become leaders or, you know, these people are all of a sudden perfect because of their position. And that's just not real. Like, I mean, and especially in my journey with Jesus and developing a relationship with God, it's like the closer I get to God and the closer I get to Jesus, the more I realize how imperfect I am. And so it's not about getting to a place. It's not about arriving. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about how deep is your relationship with Jesus, because that's what changes us. And are we hearing him? Are we hearing God? Like that's what it's about. And so it's definitely a shift of mindset, because we, again, as a society, again, in the church, really value appearances, really value, okay, like you've made it. There's like an end in sight. And it's like your entire life, you're going to struggle. And so are we being honest about that? Because it's, again, being open, being honest about these struggles, regardless of who it is with. I'm not saying you need to go around and say this all the time, but honestly, why I do my work is because I believe there is a huge deficit of honesty and authenticity and realness that is really causing people to not just spiritually starve, but physically starve as well. Like the lack of authenticity, I truly believe the lack of authenticity in our society is what is killing people. I truly believe that, because if we're not being real, and because if we're not being honest, we're not experiencing God's love as much as we need to be in order to spiritually thrive and in order to physically thrive. So,
Well, I was thinking about specifically in the church how I've seen a lot of conflict between members of a congregation and a bishop who's like a local leader of a
Yeah.
congregation. I think we hold bishops and branch presidents up to this standard.
yes.
And I hear stories, and I've heard firsthand accounts of people like, oh, branch president, bishop said this or did this, and I can't believe they would do that. And then they project that onto the church as a whole. They project that onto a lot
Yes.
of different things. And like, this person is in this leadership position. They're supposed to be like super in tune with the Spirit. They're supposed to be like doing all these things, and yet they made a mistake. Like, and then the bishop feels that perceived judgment. I've seen this, but like he feels that perceived judgment, and then he feels like a need to like double down and justify what he did. You know, because I'm a bishop, I need to be perfect.
Yeah.
All my decisions need to be right,
Yeah.
basically. And so there's no room for error, and so he feels the need to double down and
Right.
justify, rather than being like owning up to it and be like, you know, I can make mistakes too. Whereas I heard one bishop from the pulpit, he said, I want to apologize if there are any members in this congregation where I've said something that has hurt them, or if I've done something that was wrong. I am a human being just like you, and I'm trying to follow Jesus Christ and trying to be better. And I was just like, wow, that's amazing. Like, that is a true follower of Christ right there. Someone that is willing to own up to the fact that they are imperfect, rather than like feeling the need to double down and justify their actions, which just creates division.
Yeah. Yeah. This cultural desire to be perfect or to look perfect in society, in the church, is really damning us. And it's not God. God, there's no thing like any in biblical terms, like when Jesus says on the Sermon of the Mount, be perfect. I mean, all scripture people, all historians have all like come to the conclusion of like this means to be complete, essentially. Like, it's not like this term of perfect that we've like all coined perfect to be, of like no flaws, no mistakes. So yeah, God wants us to be complete, and the way that we're complete is having a relationship with God. And like, that doesn't mean that we're perfect. It just means building a relationship with God, which, as you know, as a therapist, relationships are very messy, very up and down. It's not like you get in a relationship and everything's good. It's like it's work. It's a process. Sometimes you feel really good in that relationship, and sometimes you don't. It's the same with our relationship with God. And so again, everything in the doctrine of Jesus Christ, in the Book of Mormon, in the Bible, everything points to Jesus and having a relationship with Jesus. And this idea of perfectionism is not doctrine. And it is it's very, very, very severely hurting the church. It's very severely hurting the body of Christ. It's very severely hurting society. But I mean, it's human nature to want to control. It's human nature to like take hold of things and like want to make it the thing. And it's a lot easier to focus on how you look and like appearing a certain way than like actually doing the work and being humble and being honest and being like, actually, I did make a mistake. I did hurt someone. And telling that to God, like kneeling down in prayer and telling that to God is like very humbling. It's so hard. Or telling that to another person. Like my holy cow, I mean, the older that I get, the more I'm like, ooh, people are hurting me all the time and I'm also hurting them all the time. And so what do I do about that? Well, I want to reconcile, some of these relationships, which I mean is another thing that I'm passionate about, because also what's happening in society now is people not wanting to be in relationships at all. I don't know if you know like the stats, but every year that America has like a national survey that goes out. And just last year, the Pew Research survey on like America dating habits for men between the ages of 18 to 29, 60% of them aren't even interested in a romantic relationship. And it's like 54% of women in that stat as well. It's like increasing. People are not interested in romantic relationships. People are making friends less and less. And I think a lot of that is because it's really hard, because you realize that you hurt people and they hurt you. And instead of reconciling, doing the work to reconcile, being humble, saying sorry, asking for forgiveness is really painful and uncomfortable. And it's just easier to not do it. And so what's happening is just a lot of people, in the name of boundaries, a lot of times just like cutting people off, which I'm not saying that there aren't people in your life that you should not have in your life. I'm not saying that at all. But I think just like anything with the pendulum swing, there's like a little trend of like, well, I'm just cutting off. I'm just cutting off. Like I'm not connecting with anybody at all. This is why I'm never dating again. This is why I'm not opening up to people again. And then there's just turning inward. And it's like, yes, have boundaries. Make sure, you're around people that, are trying. But at the same time, if we are not making relationships or connections with anybody at all, and we're not trying to open up, we're killing ourselves, because it's through our relationships, again, with God and with others and ourselves, that we ultimately find fulfillment, that we ultimately become who we're meant to be.
I think that what you just said ties really well into what we were talking about before.
Oh, interesting.
In terms of what is love.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And talking about love as acceptance.
Interesting.
Can you break that down a little bit for us and introduce that?
Yeah, I am trying to remember. I previously I think I mentioned this before, but I taught seminary, and which for anyone who's listening to the podcast who might not know, it's a religious education course for teenagers in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And as I taught seminary, I felt like a mediator. I'm 28 years old, and my kids were, all in their teens, but a lot of their experiences with teachers who were seminary teachers or just leaders in the church were all, people who were 50 and older. And I just started to notice a generational difference and generational gap in my kids and how they experience love and like what they think love is, and also how the older generation views and thinks what love is. And I just, Gen Z just got voted the most safe generation like a few months ago, and saw through my own experience and also just observation in society in general that the younger generation, my generation and younger generation, very much views love as acceptance and love as tolerance, because they're exposed to so much because of social media. We're exposed to things all over the world all the time, all differences, all cultures, and we want to be accepting of that. And so our sounding call, I would say, is love is accepting people for who they are and accepting them for where they're at. And I think what happened in terms of the older generation is they weren't exposed to social media at all growing up. That wasn't a thing. A lot of them have, a lot more narrow views of the world just by default of like how they were born and like where they were raised. And so they weren't exposed to as much maybe diversity or differences of opinion or differences of lifestyle. And so seeing love as acceptance or even practicing empathy wasn't like a thing for them as much. And in terms of the church specifically, what I have seen the older generation really cling to is like love is order or like love is control. Like, oh, you're not being obedient to this thing, then like you're gonna have a consequence for that. And
Like a
that like
tough love.
consequence is the love. And it's like, okay, that's like a total opposition to like the trend that is happening in terms of our generation and younger generation, where it's like, no, that is not what love is. Like, love is meeting people where they're at and accepting them. And the older generation being like, oh no, love is like the consequence. Love is like calling people out. Love is like laying down the law because like I need to tell you what to do in order for you to be successful and in order for you to be happy. And so yeah, it's kind of clashing and in terms of mental health crisis, like my kids really severely struggling with depression, really severely struggling with anxiety, and my own personal experiences with those things. When I confide in someone, I don't want them to tell me what to do. Like telling me you are wrong or telling me this is bad or that doesn't necessarily help me. What helps me is someone listening to me and not judging me and validating my experiences and helping me feel God's love from where I'm at. And I don't know if the older generation in some capacity really understands that. And also because of the lack of exposure to social media, to seeing different people and cultures from around the world, empathy is not as much practiced or even understood as it is. And I ultimately believe that that is a core part of love is empathy. And that's like really missing from, in my experiences with the older generation, from their whole lives, but also from their definition of love as well.
Mm-hmm. I tend to view the world through a polarized perspective. I view a lot of things in terms of justice and mercy.
Oh, interesting. That's so fascinating.
As you talk about that, I associate the older generations with more justice.
Yes.
It's more of that tough love, spare the rod, spoil the child type of thing. And then the new generation, more tolerance, more acceptance, as more merciful. And the thing that's awesome about Jesus Christ is like he is the only person that perfectly balances both. But in the world, we lean way too far towards one or the other. I even view like politically, and I don't know, maybe someone might view this as controversial, but like I view kind of conservative political beliefs as kind of leaning more towards justice.
Interesting.
And then
that's fascinating.
Liberal political beliefs more towards mercy.
Wow, that's really cool.
And obviously there might be some gray areas and some nuances in there, but just generally that's how I view it. And I've also kind of developed the belief like we need both. We need a balance of both.
Yeah.
And that's just me. Like, but I think I also was thinking about parenting styles, which in any introductory psychology class you learn about 4 parenting styles, right? So there's authoritative, authoritarian, then there's permissive and neglecting, right? And so authoritarian is more like that justice, kind of that, what was the word
Lay
you
down
used?
the law.
Lay down the law. Kind
Control.
of control. That's the word. Yeah. More of that control, like authoritative parents are, they're very strict. They have a lot of rules. There's big punishments for breaking the rules, sort of thing. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, there is permissive, which the parents are just trying to be that cool parent. They're trying to get, their kids to like them, and they're trying to be their kid's friend, and they're trying to get their kids' friends to like them.
Right.
And so they kind of just let their kid do whatever they want. Oh yeah, you want to take the car out? That's cool. Oh, you guys want to try alcohol? I'll give you some alcohol. Like, that kind of stuff. And like, and so I, I think there's a lot of danger in, and what I specifically market this podcast towards the younger generation, because I see a movement towards tolerance. I see a movement towards inclusion, and it, on the surface, it sounds really good. Those are good things. Inclusion is good. Tolerance is good. But I'm seeing it lean way too far towards permissiveness. Like anything goes. You hear phrases such as give someone the freedom to be who they are and love someone as they are. Accept people for who they are, let them be who they are, that kind of stuff. And I believe that is true. However, I'm going to add a clause there, is when we are too permissive, right? When we love people as they are, we can often support them in making decisions and doing things which are destructive, doing things which are morally wrong, doing things which are not good, which lead them down bad paths, which are self-destructive to themselves and also to people around them. And so when you're overly permissive, it's, love someone as they are, but what they are might need to change, in order for them and the people around them to be happiest, and to experience the best long-term benefit. And so, I see a lot of danger in that in the younger generation, of where, in the name of acceptance, in the name of tolerance, in the name of inclusion, we are basically in this kind of moral relativism, anything goes sort of thing. You live your own truth. There's no objective truth. You decide those things for yourself, and I think that's leading people down paths to where they don't really have a lot of guidance, because they're told you need to determine these things. Don't listen to authoritative figures. Don't listen to institutions, because institutions are oppressive. And there's just a general distrust of the older generation. There's a general distrust of institutions and all these things. So they don't really have a lot of guidance, because they're being told that these things are bad and that they need to be done away with. And so they're kind of just trying to figure out as they go how to live their lives. I don't know. That was a lot.
No, I'm happy. I'm really happy we're having this conversation. And yeah, I am grateful for you sharing. And I love that you have thought so much about this. I think it's really important. I think that this is really at what is like the pain point of society right now, honestly. Defining what love is and how to experience it and how to give it. I ultimately believe that the love of God is what heals and saves and changes people. And I believe that experiencing it more in our lives is how we are changed and healed and how we become who we're meant to be. And I think in terms of, a movement towards moral relativism or doing whatever you want, or like any person that's encouraging people to like not follow institutions or, to kind of guide your own way. It's interesting because you're obviously a therapist. You're not a parent. I'm not a parent. I'm not a therapist. So it's like, I see the same thing happening. I think in terms of how to address what is happening, I think we might have different views on that, which your work is different than my work. We're not going to have the same work, because I ultimately am like, in my experiences with friends or people that I love in my life who are maybe following that trend that you talked about of like, I can just do whatever I want to. It doesn't matter. I don't feel like any call to be like, telling them what to do. Does that make sense? Like, I don't feel like I have like a responsibility to like tell people what to do. I feel like my responsibility is to love the people in my life where they're at. I wholeheartedly believe that God has those people taken care of and that they can come to a knowledge themselves if they want to of like what they should be doing. And I think it's different if I, was a parent, because then I would have some stewardship over how my children were raised. But ultimately, I just like, I understand and see where you're coming from. I see and I hear like the concern, but I don't know if I feel like there's any other solution except for just listening to people and trying to understand them and trying to help them feel God's love where they're at. I don't think that there's any other solution to that for me personally in my role, and even in as I'm developing this like faith coaching practice. I don't really feel like it's my role, I guess, to tell people that what they're doing is wrong necessarily. So I'm interested in what you think about that, because this is like what you're saying is like where the division is in terms of like, especially in the church, of like in terms of LGBTQ plus issues, of like, well, like, how do I obviously don't believe that, in gay marriage or something, for people who are saying that. So like, my brother is gay, so do I go to his wedding? Like, is that, and so this is like a real topic that people are like, well, like, I want to make sure that I'm showing like allegiance to like the morals or like to God or to the church or whatever it is. I want to make sure I'm showing allegiance, and I don't want to say I'm supporting this essentially deterioration of morals, but I also want to love them. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, if it's like, I mean, if you're in alignment with God and like God knows your heart and you're in alignment with your morals and like the gospel of Jesus Christ, like that's like what God is concerned about the most. And then he's like going to help the people like come onto the right track. Like, he's going to help them. And so, yeah, that's kind of maybe a radical view. But I just really lean heavily on we're not experiencing the love of God enough and we're not sharing it enough. That's why people are hurting. And the reason why people go off and do maybe morally questionable things is because they're not experiencing the love of God enough. Like, that's the solution. It's not to tell people what to do. People know what they need to do, especially if we're talking about in the church. People know. People know they're not doing it because they're hurting, because they're in pain, because they're trying to cope. And so the solution is not to tell people what to do. It's to listen to them and help them feel seen and heard, because that's what Jesus would do. And that's how you can feel God's love, is helping people feel seen and heard in their experiences.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's funny as you're saying that, as like I don't find myself disagreeing with any of that. I think that's an awesome point that you made. And the thought that came to my mind is a quote by Thomas S. Monson, who's a former prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ, and he said, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." And so I think in that regard, love certainly has to come first. And also in terms of whether or not you should be like giving people advice or telling what them to do, it's very context specific.
Yes.
It's very relationship specific. You mentioned that if you were a parent, that would probably be a different thing for you, right? Like, I have people in my life, because of my relationship with them, they are more open to me giving them advice and telling them specific things that they can do. I have people in my life that just need to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the example that you shared kind of hits home because I have a close family member who came out recently.
Right.
And so that's been a really interesting journey for me. It honestly, when it first happened, was a catalyst for me stepping away from the church for a time because it was so hard to reconcile with my faith.
Yes.
But now I'm at a point where it's like, I just love them.
Yep.
You know, I just love them. And me being a follower of Jesus Christ and a member of the church does not contradict the fact that I love them.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm going to support them in their decisions.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that, you know, that's necessarily wrong.
Right.
You know, and I think it does depend. You know, there might come a time later in that relationship where it is appropriate
Right.
to maybe sit down and
Right.
give more advice and
Right.
to give some direction. But right now, now is not the time for that. Now is the
Right.
time to love, and people are way more receptive to advice when they feel loved first.
For sure.
And it might be 20 years of love before advice and direction and counsel comes.
Right.
Right.
Which I think is like the justice and mercy thing that you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the difference between like godly love is godly love knows when to lay the law
Yeah.
down. It knows when we're open to
Right.
it. Right. And a lot of times, like, we ask God certain questions and we want answers on things. And we're like, why am I not getting an answer? A lot of it might be you're not ready to hear the answer
Yes.
yet.
Yeah.
You know, God's going to tell you
Right.
something or to do something
Right.
that, like, you don't want to hear.
Right.
You want a specific answer.
Right.
And you're just not in the
Yes.
space to
Yeah.
hear it yet. And so he knows when to bring that revelation, when to meet that guidance.
Yeah.
And he's not going to give it to you until you're actually ready to act on it.
Yeah, that's so true. And yeah, everything that you said, I definitely agree with. And I think I think what happens is people are like, oh my gosh, like love everybody, love them no matter where they're at, scares them because they feel like that doesn't mean that there's any place for like sharing wisdom like that will help them. And it's just like the reality is it's going to be based on your situation and based on your relationship, and that requires you to be in tune with the Spirit, and that requires vulnerability, and that requires humility. And so it's like a lot easier to be like, okay, yes, I'm going to either just love everybody and let them do no matter what the rest of my life and not have any responsibility whatsoever, or I'm just going to tell everybody what to do all the time. And it's like none of those are the answer, because it's like in order to access the love of God and to experience it and to share it, we have to be in tune with God.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's so funny that we're having this conversation now because I just got back a week ago from a vacation to Oregon, which is my favorite state to be in. And it was really an amazing trip. On the way back, there were 4 of us in the car. And I was kind of venting about my dating struggles.
yes.
And at that point, I was not trying to hear any advice. I was looking to be validated.
Yes.
And I immediately got hit with like a lot of advice.
Yes.
Like, oh, you just need to put yourself out there
Right.
more. You just need to like go up and talk to
Yes.
girls more. Or you need to you need to go on dates more often,
Right.
ask more girls out, and all these things. And I just got like a kind of a dump truck of advice. And I said, I was like, I think we should like change the direction. And I said this like very calmly and politely of the conversation. They're like, why is that? And I was like, because I feel myself like getting more frustrated like as this conversation goes on. And it was just like,
I'm
I
so
wasn't,
proud of you for saying that and expressing that.
yeah. And it was hard. I had to like say that through like a smile that's kind of like, you know? But like, I was just had this rising frustration because I wasn't in a place where I wanted to hear that advice.
Right.
Like, and maybe a lot of that advice was legitimate and was right in a lot of ways, but I didn't want to hear it. I just
Right.
wanted to hear, you know what? You are in a tricky predicament. Like, that is hard. You know, what you're feeling is valid, and I'm sorry, basically.
Yeah.
And so I think, Yeah, a lot of times I think we get frustrated with our parents and the reason why we're not vulnerable with them a lot of the time is when we open up about them, it's immediately just advice, advice, advice. And I think the older generation, like they value giving advice and receiving advice from other people. And so that's kind of their mode of showing love is by giving advice. I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to share this wisdom with you. And then we get frustrated because it's like the message that we receive from that is like, you're just not smart enough to figure this problem out, or, you know, you're not capable, like, you just need to like do better basically. And so we think that when someone gives us advice, the younger generation, we think that they view us as incapable.
Yep.
And they view us as not smart enough, not
Right.
knowledgeable enough, not experienced enough, which may be true in a lot of ways. And it's really hard to accept that for us because it's like a pride thing. It's like, I know I can figure this out. Like, I know how to do it, you know, and we really just want to like be validated in our struggles rather than hear that advice. So.
Yes, I resonate very strongly with that. Like I said, I've been in Utah for a couple months. Before that, I was in Arizona for a year living with my parents. What happened was came home, moved in with my parents, was severely depressed, and it was really hard to navigate that relationship with my parents. And I had to learn how to communicate, like if I wanted them to validate what I was experiencing or if I needed them to share their thoughts. And so what I would do, and like what I've learned to do since then with my parents and also in my friendships as well, is if I like want to vent about something or like before I start like sharing, I let them know, hey, like I need this. This is like why I'm coming. And then immediately like my friends and my parents are like, okay, like that's what we can give to you. And so that like has been like a huge like thing that I have learned over the course of this last year, that like the people in my life have been like really reciprocative of, which is awesome. I know not everybody has that, but especially in my like close friends as well, like we've started to ask each other as well, like, what do you need right now? Like, what are you looking for from this experience or from this conversation before it happens? And that has like solved so many issues because then you're not as hurt and you're like being open. So,
You know, it sounds so common sense. It's just like, duh, just communicate your needs. But like a lot of times, and I've worked with people with marriage and relationship conflicts, there is an assumption that like this person should just know
right.
what I want. Like, and why can't they just, you know, why can't they just take the hint,
Right.
you know, that like, this is what I need, or like, you know, why doesn't he just talk to me? Why does he keep being quiet? That
Right.
sort of thing. And we just continue to assume that people should just know what we want and need, and then we get frustrated with them when we don't explicitly communicate that want and need, because there's like this feeling of like, if this person really knew me, then they would know like what I really want and need. And you know, after 20 years of marriage, you would think that
Right.
they would just know. And like, I don't know, I think that is a skill that after hearing you say that, I want to be better
Yeah.
at communicating my life.
Same.
Like, hey, like I'm kind of looking for some advice,
Yep.
or hey, I kind of am struggling right now and I'm kind of just looking for validation.
Yep. But the thing is with that, I mean, it's not like I'm perfect at that at all. I'm not. The thing about that is that's scary to say because you're admitting that you need something, that you are looking for something. And I think a lot of times that's why it's hard to communicate, because it's like, oh, like I'm coming to you because I need something that I don't have that I'm hoping that you give me. And that's vulnerable in itself. And so what's happening in society is like, you know, just like sheer aversion to vulnerability because of experiences that they've had with parents or friends where they've, you know, opened up and then they haven't given them what they've needed. And instead of like communicating that, like just not communicating it at all because it's too painful, because you're scared that like that same thing is going to happen again. And so it's just like easier to turn inward and like, well, I'm just not going to put myself out there in this situation at all. But the reality is we have to have relationships and we have to connect with people, and the only way that we can get what we need is by communicating that, and we have to communicate it a lot because we're human and we forget. And so even if you have been married for 20 years, it's like, I mean, human nature. We're so weak, you know, we're so fragile. I'm learning the same lesson that I have been learning since I was 13. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like, uh, well, and that's the thing is like, the reality is we need the love of God. Like, we need Jesus because like we are not going to ever become anything like on our own because we're just messing up all the time, you know? And we're trying to communicate all the time, and we're hurting people all the time, and we're hurting ourselves all the time. We're not going to be able to find like any peace or, you know, comfort in any of those experiences without Jesus. And so that's why God asks us to turn to him, because it's like, oh, Jesus is the perfect example of love. Jesus is the perfect mediator. Jesus is the perfect reconciler. Like, he knows how to reconcile. He knows how to help you forgive. He knows how to help you ask for what you need. He knows how to help you be honest. He knows how to help you be vulnerable. He wants to help you do all of those things. But it's only through him that we can really get the strength to do it. Because without him, without God, we are just literally flailing fish, like getting hurt, hurting people, trying to like reconcile, and like failing in that. And so, yeah, like I truly believe that Jesus is the ultimate healer and mediator in every sense.
Yeah. As you were talking, I thought about my mission specifically.
Also, where are you from?
I'm half from New Jersey, and then I moved to Harriman, Utah to finish middle school and high school.
Okay,
So,
cool. And
yeah.
where did you serve your mission?
Arkansas.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you love Oregon just like a random coincidence?
Because it's really cool.
Cool.
I've visited there a couple
That's
times,
amazing.
and I love it. So,
I love that. Sorry,
Yeah.
continue your mission.
anyways, where was your mission?
I served in Southern California it was called the Redlands Mission. Now it's the San Bernardino
Cool.
Mission. So the desert part of Southern California, not like any of I didn't have the ocean or anything.
Yeah.
But I loved it. I'm from a small desert town, and so I essentially served in small
Just
desert towns on
hopped
the
on
mission.
over.
So yeah, I'm
Very cool.
a desert girly.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna share an experience from my mission, because I think a lot of us read the New Testament and we see how Jesus interacted with the Pharisees and the scribes, and like when they were doing something that wasn't right, he very blatantly called it out. And so I think a lot of us like, okay, well, Jesus very blatantly calls people that are wrong out.
Yes.
Right? And I think it's an important thing to distinguish, like, he's God.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he can do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, yeah, yes, we are trying to be like Jesus, but at the same time, so I think at the beginning of my mission, I kind of incorporated that when I'd meet Christians that wanted to argue with me about doctrine and different stuff and wanted to Bible bash,
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of call them out and like be very blunt and like try and win the argument,
Mm-hmm.
basically. And that was, even though we were told not to do that, it ended up happening quite a bit. And it didn't work, never worked, obviously. And towards the end of my mission, like, any time that someone would say, hey, I'm of this faith, I don't want to change, or if they would argue, I'd just be like, that is amazing. Like, your faith in Christ is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That is so cool. Can I pray with you?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they'd be like a little hesitant and be like, well, is he going to pray that God is going to change my mind or forgive my sins or whatever? They're a little skeptical at first, but it's like, no, I'm not. I don't have any agenda with this. Like, I just want to pray for you. Like, pray for you to bless you in your life.
Yeah.
And when they would allow me to do that, I'd just be like, Heavenly Father, please bless this good person for their faith in Christ. Bless them, you know, for the work that they do. If they were a pastor, bless them and their congregation, that they can increase like their faith in Christ.
Yeah.
Bless them that they'll be able to do all these things. And and it just became about like meeting this person where they were at and trying to increase the faith that they already had rather than to change it, and to take the good that was already there and to just focus on that rather than focus on the differences, the contradictions, or whatever. And that changed like everything, to the point you're on a doorstep with a pastor who's like very combative and argumentative and trying to prove that you're, like, your church is false and that you're going to hell or whatever. And all of a sudden you're praying for him and his family. You're praying for his congregation. You're praying for his household.
Yeah.
It's like the Book of Mormon says, to pray over their flocks, to pray over their herds, to, you're praying that God will like give them abundance in their life. And then the prayer ends, and then like all of a sudden the pastor is like kind of sheepish, like, oh, well, thanks.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I guess these are like good kids. And then all of a sudden, like, this person who was argumentative and combative has had a positive experience with missionaries from our church. And so the next time that they see missionaries, they're going to have a positive memory to hang on to, rather than, oh, these are the people that want to tell me that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Or that that my doctrine isn't, that I don't have the full truth or whatever.
Right.
Oh, these are people that love and care like Jesus did. And that was a
Amen.
huge shift. So
I love that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just excited for
No,
you.
go ahead.
No, that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Just loving people where they're at. And that's what Jesus would do. Like, and I believe it's all this, honestly, heaven is going to be crowded. Heaven is going to be crowded. It's all the same work, honestly. Like, also the millennium is a very long time. Like, people are outside the church, like, so much good is happening. Like, so much good. People are doing so much work to help people find God. So many. I've recently, because I was exposed to a lot of different cultures from a very young age and had a lot of conversations with people from all over the world, and have essentially made that like my entire life's mission in a lot of ways. Buddhism, I have a lot of friends in the meditation world. I have a lot of friends in like yoga world. Like, all of these things are so much good in terms of helping people find God. And yeah, there's a lot of that, like a lot of good, a lot of people who are specifically Christian and like pastors who are doing so much to help people find God and to help people find Jesus. There's so much of that. And yeah, we should encourage that and foster that like any second that we get. And so I love you praying with them. That's what Jesus would do, honestly. That's what he would do. Like, he would pray with them. And call them to repentance, of course. But like, what is repentance? Asking them to come closer to Jesus. And a lot of people are trying to do that.
Yeah, and I think the clear distinction that I was going to make is like the Pharisees and scribes were people that were using their religiosity as a means of like, I'm better than the people that I serve, which is like the majority of pastors and people I came across on my mission didn't do that.
Yeah.
And there might be, some people in the Christian world that use religion as a means of power and control, but like the majority of people are just sincere.
Amazing.
They're genuine. Like, I think of people like George Janko, incredible. Bryce Crawford is another great Christian influencer. Jordan Peterson, who's not like as explicitly Christian, but he like talks about Christian ideas, and like they're doing such great work to help increase people's faith in God.
I think a core doctrine, at least in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is all good things come from God. And so like, there's so much good. People are trying. There's so much light. I really believe what President Nelson said a couple conferences ago, when he said, we will see the greatest manifestations of the Savior's power that the world has ever seen in the coming days. And so, yes, maybe there's like a huge opposition to that, an uptick in darkness. It's not a joke that like we're seeing the statistics that we are in terms of like suicide rates or like depression or despair. there's very real pain, there's very real sorrow, but like there's also very real light and so many miracles and so many manifestations of God. And we're only going to see that increase the closer it gets to Jesus coming again. So, yeah.
Very, very cool. Wow, this has been awesome. I don't know. Do you have anything else that you'd like to talk about? Or?
No, I think this has been really cool. And yeah, obviously awesome that I didn't expect it to go any certain way and it just kind of flowed. And I really appreciated that. And I feel really grateful for you. And I guess I'm getting emotional. I cry every day, like over sad and happy things. But what you're doing is so important, and not in terms of this podcast. I mean, this podcast is something that you're doing, but in terms of trying to find God and trying to find Jesus and being like him and trying to love other people is amazing. And I can tell that you are genuine in that pursuit and that you're trying, and that's what matters. And so we need that. We need that. The world needs it. But most importantly, you need that. Because really, it's not like you're doing these things because, other people, you're making a difference in other people's lives. But really, God's number one concern is your own salvation and your joy and your happiness and your exaltation and your growth. And he's so proud, and he is doing everything he can to help you find that joy and find that peace. And through these actions of service and like doing this podcast and trying to connect with people, you are becoming your true self. You are becoming in alignment with your divine identity. You're being real. And that's what we need. So
Thank you. I think I'm trying to get better at receiving compliments, but
yes.
that was that was very kind of you. I
Of
appreciate
course.
that.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot that you said that you were doing
No,
that.
no.
I know,
Well,
and I'm thanking you for being honest.
yeah. And my experience doing this podcast is like obviously I want to make a positive impact in other people's lives, but this has blessed me in so many ways that I didn't anticipate.
Cool.
Like every time I have these conversations, I feel uplifted. I feel the Spirit of God. I feel just good, and I feel excited to put it out in the world. And sometimes it gets like discouraging, like, oh, like this episode only had 20 plays. Like what is going on? Like I worked so hard on this one. Like why aren't more people listening to
Right.
this? And but like, hey, that's 20 plays. Like that's still kind of cool. Like
Yes.
20 different people heard it. And so if you are listening to this podcast, thank you. Thank you for being here. If it has blessed or uplifted you in some way, I would be so appreciative if you could do whatever you can to share it with other people. We're trying to grow the podcast as much as we can. You can follow the podcast on Spotify or Apple Music, and you can follow it on Instagram at Turn Outward Podcast. If you can help like the reels that I post and comment, share with friends, post to your story, whatever you can do to help the algorithm kind of put it out there a little bit more, that helps me out, and that helps the message of Turn Outward reach more people. So thank you again for being here. And Hannah, thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.